We have former Northwestern great Tre Demps. Tre led Northwestern in scoring both his junior and senior seasons. He played professionally for 4 seasons and now is a college basketball analyst on NBC. Tre, welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
Appreciate you having me on, man. I'm doing well, man. Just getting prepared, excited for this upcoming season. I think there's a lot of parity, so yeah, I'm just looking forward to the season. Looking forward to being a part of NBC's broadcast team, and yeah, just ready to get rolling.
Yes, sir. And are you going to be more focused towards the Big Ten still, or is it more like broad, more college basketball hoops around the country for you?
It's going to be focused more on the Big Ten.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe potentially doing some digital stuff with them, calling some games primarily. But obviously with the package that Peacock has, NBC has with the Big Ten, I'm definitely more focused and locked into covering the conference.
Hey, yeah, no. Hey, that's my favorite brand of basketball, and it's not a popular statement, but I think the Big Ten is the place to be. So, yeah, so let's get into here. And for the viewers, we're gonna talk a little bit about Tre's college days, and then we'll go into a Big Ten preview. I got a few questions though about his time at Northwestern, and starting with we were talking off camera. You played against some really tough competition in the Big Ten. I think from 2012, 2016, the Big Ten was really, really tough. Who are some of your favorite matchups to go head to head with?
Oh man, I could go on for hours, man. You know, I think for me, I always loved playing against the top guys, the first
Sure.
league guys, the Yogi Ferrells,
Yep.
Denzel Valentines of the world, the Mellow Trembles, some of those guys that were, some of the best players to ever play, in the conference. But even some of the guys that, were kind of underrated. I always say the hardest matchup for me was Roy Devin Marble. He was a little
Okay.
bit older than me. He was 6'6", could shoot over the top of me. I always struggled against him. And then you got some of the guys who were one and dones. Oladipo. I think he was there 2 years. But then you had D'Angelo Russell. So man, there's some great players, man. And I always coming from Northwestern that doesn't have that tradition of being a basketball powerhouse, I loved coming in as that underdog and embracing some of those matchups.
Yeah, no, I mean just hearing those names, man, the nostalgia, it's just good to hear those names. It was a great era. Loved watching it. And yeah, you kind of yeah, you were a part of the beginning of Chris Collins' tenure at Northwestern. And my question is, obviously you had a different coach when you first got to Northwestern. Why did you stay loyal to Northwestern and Chris Collins and not decide to hit the portal, even though the portal wasn't a thing? Why did you not transfer?
Yeah, so one of the reasons was I'd already redshirted the year. So I would have lost with the rules at that time. I would have only been able to play 3 years of college basketball.
Okay.
So my freshman year, I had shoulder surgery, and so I had a medical red shirt. And then my redshirt freshman year, I played for Coach Carmody, and that was his last season before getting let go. So for me, the Princeton offense and the way that Coach Carmody liked to run it didn't fit my game well. I loved, Coach Carmody. He was a great guy. Great coach. I mean, just a mastermind offensively, but it just wasn't a fit for my game. So
Sure.
when Coach Collins came in, or when I knew that we were going to have the coaching change, it was kind of like a fresh opportunity, like a clean slate for me as a player to kind of reinvent myself, so to speak. And so, I was ecstatic when I heard we were bringing Coach Collins on. I obviously watched Duke and kind of the more pro style offense that they played, and kind of knowing that that's what he was going to bring to Northwestern. And so for me, it was kind of a perfect fit. And then I think personality wise, we come from similar backgrounds, with his dad and my dad, obviously kind of being highly known and highly known NBA guys, more so his dad being, a legend and coaching Michael Jordan, being a great TV analyst, my dad being in the management side of things. So, I think we shared a love for the game, and we kind of clicked instantly.
Sure. And obviously, you played in a lot of big games. You had a lot of clutch shots throughout your career at Northwestern. What was your what game do you look back most fondly at when you reminisce about your time at Northwestern?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it probably was the game at Assembly Hall my sophomore year, because that was kind of the game where I established myself as a primary offensive option. I'd struggled mightily the first, 25 minutes of the game, and then had made some big plays down the stretch to, lead us to a victory. And we'd won a few games on the road in a row, beating Wisconsin. And so I think during that stretch was probably one of my most memorable moments, because I'd worked for, up until that point, 2.5 years of trying to establish myself as a primary offensive option. I think that was when the coaching staff and my teammates kind of trusted me to be that.
All right. And what's your overall, your proudest moment, proudest accomplishment from your time at Northwestern?
That's a great question. I honestly, it's watching the 16-17 team. I obviously wasn't a part of that team, having graduated in 2015, 2016. But, I felt like I was one of the guys who laid the foundation and the momentum for them to have that type of season. And so, I remember I was in Belgium when they had beat Michigan to kind of solidify their spot with the game winner by Derek Pardon, with a great pass from Nate Taphorn, the full court pass. And that was kind of the game where you knew for sure that they were a lock to make the NCAA tournament. And so I think that moment for me, obviously I think that there was it was bittersweet in some ways, because I think selfishly you want to be a part of that. And that was my dream coming to Northwestern, knowing they had never made the tournament. And that was, my goal and our goal collectively to be on that first team. But at the same time, you kind of know that, the foundation that you laid. And one of the mantras we had was pounding the rock. Pounding the rock, and it's not the 100th hit that breaks the rock, but it's all the hits before that. It's kind of like one of the mantras. It still is for the program. But and knowing that I had some of those hits in there to eventually get to Northwestern over the top.
Yeah, and yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about that too. Is like you had, especially your fifth year, your team, you had a 20-win team in a very good Big Ten, where it could have been, say it was a different year in the Big Ten, maybe where it wasn't so tough, not so competitive. That team was plenty good enough to make the NCAA tournament, so I can understand that being a little bittersweet. And then I also, guys, shout out like your sophomore year team, because I really enjoyed the combination of you, Crawford, and Cobb before Cobb went out. I thought that was a really nice team, stuck in a really tough Big Ten where you had 2-seeded Michigan who made Elite Eight, 2-seeded Wisconsin made the Final Four. Michigan State was a 4 or 5 seed, but they had the talent of a 1 seed. So yeah, no, you had some good teams, and it's just such a fine line, especially as you're building the program. You talked about depth off camera, just not having the depth to plug in when Cobb goes out, what do we do now? But it seems like Northwestern's kind of built that foundation where, they have pieces. You guys had pieces, but you just got to have a little bit more just to get over that line. Before we get into this Big Ten preview, tell me, how have you grown the most since you graduated at Northwestern? Spent some time overseas. You're an analyst now. How have you grown the most since you were 23 years old?
That's a great question. I think going overseas completely changed my perspective of life. Just seeing how different cultures live, seeing different philosophies, meeting different types of people, right? I was in Belgium, in Italy, in Greece, I will always cherish those years. Those were some of the best years of my life. Just being able to go away, play basketball, do something that you love. Then obviously, wasn't able to continue my career just because of injuries, hip arthritis. And so around, peak COVID time, kind of made a transition into, doing what I'm doing now as a broadcaster. And something, I don't know if color TV and, speaking has always been my strongest skill set. You know, I've always been a writer. I've always loved writing, and as
Oh,
a
yeah.
kid, I wanted to be a journalist, actually. But obviously, it's the way that the media landscape is changing. And especially former players having to, most of them being on air, giving their expertise analysis. It was something that I was always interested in, and something that I grew up watching all the shows, even when First Take used to be Cold Pizza, and watching Skip Bayless and watching all the journalists, analyze and critique. And, this is something that I was always interested in. And so took a dive into it. Was fortunate enough to my alma mater, Northwestern, for giving me some opportunities to call some games on BTN Plus, I believe 2 years ago. Was fortunate to start my career with the Big Ten Network, spent 2 seasons there, and now transitioning to NBC. So it's been a good journey. It's definitely a tough business to get into, as I'm sure you know, and but I'm excited for what's ahead.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that's kind of like the dream for most kids. You play high level basketball, and then you get paid to talk sports afterwards. That's you're living the dream. You're living the dream. That's awesome. So yeah, no, and you kind of answered my next question about was being a sports analyst or getting involved in sports. Was that always the plan? And yeah, you kind of answered that there. So let's move into some current Big Ten hoops. And talk about the media came out their power rankings, and I'll read it to you and follow up with the question. So the Big Ten media said they're going to have Minnesota at 14th, Penn State 13th, Nebraska 12th, Michigan 11th, Rutgers 10th, Iowa in the 9th spot, Northwestern 8, Ohio State 7, Indiana 6, Wisconsin 5, Illinois 4, Maryland 3, Michigan State 2, Purdue 1. And when you hear me rattled off that list, is there any teams you think are obviously too high or too low?
One team that's too low that stood out right away, and I was familiar with that list, is Penn State. I think Penn State could definitely make some noise this year and find themselves in the middle of the pack, so to speak. I always feel like every year from like 6 to 10, it's like a 1 or 2 game difference. It literally can come down to possessions, right? And so, watching their exhibition game, they have a ton of size. They're going to completely kind of flip their identity from what they've been in previous years of being kind of a more defensive-minded team. Coach Rhodes coming from VCU, that's something that he emphasizes and he's going to instill into the program. I love their length, their athleticism. They got 2 quick guards, right, that can really score and play at a high level. And so, I think Penn State is a team that I think is not getting enough love, and I think that can really surprise some people this year.
Yeah, and Penn State, for me, I was also going to ask, like, I don't really know what to expect for them, because it looks like they do have some good talent from the portal, but new coach, they got to get all these veteran pieces to mesh, and it might take a second for them, but some of the names are pretty talented. Like, I know they got VCU's top guard, who's a pretty good player. Yeah, so I think them, and then another team who I don't really know what to expect is Indiana. Like, they've had Race Thompson and Trace Jackson Davis for the last 30 years. I think they were playing while you were playing, but they're finally gone, and now they bring in some new talented front court pieces from the portal. They bring back Xavier Johnson. What expectations do you have for Indiana? Because I have no clue what to expect.
Yeah, I actually made a post about this. I'm kind of with you with that. Like, this could be a team that could be anywhere from, I think, being a top 5 team, because they have top 5 talent, to a team that I think could probably be somewhere on the bubble around that, that 10th seed. Because you think about from a season ago, Rutgers was a 10th seed and just found themselves outside the tournament. So that's kind of where I see them, in that 5 to 10 range. I think the development of Malik Renew is going to be huge for this team. He has all the skills and the tools to be an all Big Ten player, to be a guy that's a 16-8 player that can be a go-to threat on the post without TJD. So I think I'm looking at him, looking at Xavier Johnson, how he bounces back from the injury. Obviously Mackenzie Mbako is 5-star recruit. What does he bring? Can he bring some shooting and a perimeter threat with his size and his versatility? So yeah, for me, I think with Indiana, man, it could really go either way. And then Khalil Ware as well is a guy that has a ton of potential. Didn't have a great freshman season, or not what people expected, at Oregon a season ago. And so seeing how he develops and how him and Renew play together at the 4-5 tandem is going to be really interesting. And I think my prediction is I think they're going to be up and down. I think there's going to be games where they might beat a Purdue, they might beat a Michigan State, but then they might lose to a Nebraska. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I foresee. And I think they're a tournament team, but I think it's going to be a team that's going to maybe take a little bit of a while to find themselves.
Yeah, and maybe, and a fresh start could be, as good as Trace Jackson Davis was. I mean, a fresh start, a new era, could be exactly what they needed. And my next question is for you is, well, who's, if you had to pick, I know it's preseason, no one really knows, but if you had to pick, what's your top 5 heading into the season of the Big Ten?
Ooh. For me, top 2 is easy. I think I got Michigan State at 1. I got Purdue at 2. I think those 2 teams are pretty. I feel really good about those 2 picks. For me, honestly, it's a tie between Illinois and Maryland. I think those 2 teams can be interchangeable for me. I haven't had a chance to see Maryland. I don't think they've had a televised game. Obviously, Illinois beat Kansas, preseason #1 team. And they looked awesome, moving the ball, have a ton of depth. They're connected more than they were mid-season last season in the first game. And so I really like what I saw from Illinois, but I also just love the core pieces that Maryland brought back with Young, Julian Reese, and Dante Scott. So I think those 2 can be interchangeable. And then 5 for me, I really like, I watched them, I believe last night, Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin, they bring back 93% of their scoring. They add some depth with AJ Storr, who looks like he's probably going to be in the starting lineup and potentially a season kind of being an off-the-bench scorer. And I like their freshman class, too. They have some guys that really impressed me that I think they can contribute, because I think that's been one of the things about Wisconsin is their depth. It's been a question mark. But I think this is a team this year that can go 9, 10, 11 deep. And so, I'm excited to see Wisconsin. I think for me, that's probably the 5th best team. And then I'll probably go Northwestern 6.
Okay. And I totally agree. Especially last season, Wisconsin, after Wall went out, especially, but their depth and athleticism was missing. And I do think that Storr fills all or most of the holes they had on their team. They needed more athleticism, and just adding him alone, moving a Siege into the bench, that is night and day difference from their bench last year. And honestly, just a Siege alone might be Guard's best bench we've seen. They had a pretty good bench in 1920, but the depth hasn't been there. I do think Storr is really under the radar right now. I think Storr, he impressed me in the red-white. He impressed me. His highlights in the Big East. I think Storr is really under the radar. I could see him potentially being Wisconsin's best player kind of out of the blue, and no one really sees it coming. So I think he changes things where people are like, they return everyone from a really average team last year, but it's like, no, Storr makes a big difference. And so everyone, including you, including me, has Michigan State, Purdue at the top 2. But if you had to pick a team, who could crack that top 2 and potentially give someone a run for their money for the title this year, for the Big Ten title?
Oh man,
if you had to pick one,
for me, I think it's got to be Illinois. I think it's got to be Illinois, and Illinois has kind of been a sporadic team the last few seasons. Another team where, on a given night, they could look like the best team in the country, and on another night, they could look like a bottom feeder team. And I think this is the year that they put it together and have that consistency and that camaraderie. And it just seems like they have we guys versus me guys. And I think in the past they've had a lot of me guys. And look,
Yeah.
I said this before. I was a me guy, and there's nothing wrong necessarily with you. Sometimes you need some me guys, right? But I think with this team, they got a lot of guys who has success at other places. You know, Domas had a ton of success at Southern Illinois. Harmon has success at the mid-major level that are coming to this program to help them win the championship. And they're willing to play any role that's necessary for them to do that. And so that was the biggest thing that I love to see, you know, just their depth. They got a good freshman class, guys who can contribute if there's injuries. And so I think for me, it's got to be Illinois, man. I think that's the team that would challenge Purdue or Michigan State for the top 2 spots.
Sure, and I think you hit it on the head. That's kind of exactly how I think about Illinois. They're a team that the last years they've had as much talent as anybody, but they have their moments where they look like the best team in the conference, and then I feel like they've been fizzling out late in the year. And part of that, I think, is Underwood has had too much roster turnover year in, year out. You know, you bring in a bunch of talented guys from the portal, but you lose 8 guys, and you just consistently do that. It's not easy to win that way. It's harder to get all these egos to mesh as one. So I do think he does bring back some continuity. So hopefully for their sake, that they start meshing. But I do think, and I know they just beat Kansas, but my hot take is if that chemistry isn't there, I could see them potentially being on the bubble. That's my hot take. Is I think if chemistry's not there, I could see them on the bubble. Are they more talented than they were last year?
They're deeper. They're deeper.
Okay.
You know, you lose Meyer, you lose Epps. I think those were their the 2 pieces that they lost that were, you know, primary offensive options. I think this team, all of a sudden, Ty Rodgers is going to have an increased role. You bring in Domas. Gary Year is coming in. You got a good freshman class. I mean, this is a team. I mean, they got like 8 or 9 starters, like Big Ten starters, in my opinion. So I think Terrence Shannon Jr. is gonna be more efficient this year than he was last year and be a top 5 player in the league. So yeah, for me, I really think that I don't see a way, even if things go downhill, that they're a bubble team. I think it's like worst case scenario last year, because they were an 8 or 9 or no
8 or 9, and then they got smacked around in the 8 or 9 matchup by was it Arkansas?
So I mean, like that's how I feel. I feel like there's no way this team, in my opinion.
No, that's my hot take. That's my hot take, because they've been irritating me.
Coleman Hawkins goes down. Dane Danger goes down. We haven't even mentioned Dane Danger.
Yeah,
Dane Danger's coming off the bench right now, and one of the most efficient players in the Big Ten. So I mean, this team's got some guys, man, that can really go, and some versatility in different ways they can play on the offensive end.
Yeah, no, I see. For me, Coleman Hawkins is just a lean forward with the media behind him. That's my opinion. He's a lean forward with the media hype train around him. I'm not trying to disrespect Hawkins or Illinois or put you in a tough spot. But I think I've been high on Illinois in the last few years, where I'm like, I think they're good. Like I think they can make a deep run. They just let me down every year. They have so much talent, and then they get smacked by Houston. They got smacked by Loyola Chicago when they had the
point. I mean, they like, what was that, 2 years ago when they had Io, Trent, all those guys.
They looked great. They looked so good throughout Big Ten play, and then they just fizzle. So that's why I'm being extra hard on them. Illinois fans, I'm sorry, but I feel like I'm just bitter because I was a believer in the past, and I just keep getting let down. So my hot take is towards Illinois.
I'll say this. Once tournament play comes around, you just never know.
Yeah.
I guess I'm more speaking from the regular season. I'm speaking just regular season. Once you get to the tournament, man, you might be a 2 seed, and then you just play the hottest team in the country that happens to be a 7 seed. You know what I mean? So you just never know when you get into that bracket, man.
I agree. I agree. So maybe the scenario is okay. I feel like they fizzled, especially last year. I feel like they started to fizzle at the end. If that fizzle starts earlier, that's where my hot take comes in. Like if it's
That's fair.
February and they start fizzling, like they're gonna have their moments. They might come out and be a top 10 team right away, but I'm not counting out them to fizzle just based off of last year's. But if it's true, I mean, you know better than me. I mean, I follow college hoops closely, but you're a true. I mean, that's what you do for a living. You're an expert on it. If they have the wee guys and their chemistry is there, then the ceiling's high. I'm not discounting their ceiling. I think they have a high ceiling, but I think they also have a chance to fizzle. So, yeah, that's my hot take. We'll move on to the next topic, and let's talk a little bit about our alma mater, Northwestern. They returned half of their two-headed monster. They had Boo Buie and Chase Audige, who were awesome last year. They bring Langborg, I believe, from Princeton, who I think will be a big player for them. But what does Northwestern have to do to have a repeat performance, make the NCAA tournament again? What do they have to do?
Well, just watching them in their exhibition and going to a few practices, I think this team is going to be better offensively.
Okay.
I think, and they were a good offensive team. I think they have a chance to be a top 2 or 3 team offensively. I do personally believe they're going to take a step down defensively. That's just and I think that comes with human nature. When you know that you can make shots, and you bring in a guy like Langborg, I think Ty Berry's going to get a lot more opportunities because now you got to pick. Which one are you going to let shoot on the weak side when Boo Buie's playing in pick and roll situations? You know what I mean? So there's nobody you can really help off of, so to speak. And Brooks Barnhizer, I think, is going to have a breakout year and have a lot more opportunities on the offensive end. They're going to play through him a ton in the post and use him in different ways. And so for me, I think that they're going to be really, really talented on the offensive end. I still think they're going to be a good defensive team, but I think my opinion right now watching them is they're not going to be elite defensively. Okay. And so I think in a lot of ways, I think they're going to be better this year because I think they're going to be able to score the ball at a high rate. It's just going to look a little bit. Their success, I think, is going to look a little bit different. I still predict them to go to the NCAA tournament. Maybe a little bit higher seed, right? Maybe get a 5 or a 6 seed, and then once you get into that tournament, man, anything could happen. So, I think that they're going to have another successful year. I think they're going to get to the tournament again. Boo Buie had the hand injury in the summer. He looks completely fine. So there's no reason for me to believe that they're gonna take a big dip this year.
Sure. Yeah. No, and that's the thing. I thought Collins did such a great job last year. We're getting. I feel like what's the phrase? The sum of the parts. Or the sum was greater than the parts. The sum was greater than the parts. Their defense last year was fantastic, and it just. There was a point in the season where I looked at the percentages, the field goal percentages, and I'm like, how are they winning games when like everyone is shooting like 36% from the field? Like it was incredible. So I got to give Collins a ton of credit. And Audige did have a lower field goal percentage, if I do recall, but his defense was phenomenal, and he was streaky. He could get hot offensively. But I could see that, especially with Langborg. I mean, he was great in the tournament with Princeton. I do think Northwestern, I could see them improving offensively, and it'll just be hard for any team to be as good as Northwestern was last year. They were just great. And for this upcoming year, do you see anyone on Northwestern who's under the radar who you think can have a big jump this year?
I think it's Ty Berry. I think there's been a lot of hype about Barnhizer being the breakout guy. And I think there's a lot of expectation on Langborg as well, coming in from Princeton, his success in the NCAA tournament, making a Sweet 16 and all that. But I think Ty Berry is going to have a stellar season. I think he could be a guy that, he's been around like 8 to 9 points per game. I could see that number this year getting up to 13, 14, maybe even 15 points per game and being a 40% three-point shooter. If that happens, Northwestern's going to be a top 4 team because Boo Buie, even let's say Boo Buie is not a first team all Big Ten player this year, right? And maybe he's not that just because he has other weapons on the offensive end where he's kind of distributing and letting other guys go a little bit. If Ty Berry, as potentially a fourth option can be, a consistent double-figure threat, that's just going to put them over the top for me. And so I think he's the guy, he's the key this year because he's primed to do it. He's a fourth-year guy. He's been around the program, knows the offense. He's got another shooter with him that's going to take up a lot of attention, and teams are going to have to account for. So that's the guy for me that I think is that no one's talking about, that's kind of under the radar, that can have a great year this year.
Sure. And looking around the Big Ten this year, do you think it'll be stronger or weaker than it was last year?
Man, that's a good question. I think that I really do believe that, one of the elephants in the room for the conference is how, we performed in the tournament, and you can't deny that. The numbers, speak for themselves. I think this is a year where maybe preseason, we've actually kind of seen it in the exhibitions. Purdue lost to Arkansas. Michigan State lost to Tennessee without their backcourt. Maybe this is the season where we don't do as good in the preseason and maybe don't look even as good early on in conference, but we just get progressively better as the season goes along. And then we get to our climax as a conference, so to speak, when it really matters in the NCAA tournament. And so I could see a situation, and the ACC kind of has this a lot, where they'll have some lower seeds go far. They'll have some, in the Big East too. They'll have some UConn has done it. Syracuse has done it. These schools that, obviously highly respected, maybe not have a ton of great success in the conference play or non-con, but once it gets to tournament time, they're hitting their stride and getting to that climax. And so I think this is a year for the Big Ten to do that collectively. I think this could be a year where we get a lot of teams in the Sweet 16, and then we get one or two teams back in the Final Four in Phoenix.
Okay, so if you're a betting man, is the Big Ten getting a Final Four team this year?
Yes. Right. I think so. I think it's Purdue. I think back to Virginia.
Yep.
Losing to that 16 seed, and what happened, right?
Yeah. Hell of a story.
Those type of experiences can make you or break you. You know what I mean? And I think just the mindset, the leadership of Matt Painter, I think this is going to be something that makes them. And I think that's going to be the team that represents the conference in Phoenix.
Yeah, and the one thing I do want to throw out there, because I've made that comparison before. I think it's a great comparison, could be a great story. But Virginia, I mean, off the top of my head, I think they had 3 guys drafted. That DeAndre Hunter was a lottery pick. You had Kyle Guy was a first-round pick, and Jerome was an early second-round pick, and I think some other guys might have had some cups of coffee in the NBA, but they had NBA talent on their team. And for Purdue, there's no one who I can truly say right now that I know will be playing in the NBA. I think they can definitely do that story, but I think that's one thing to keep in mind with that comparison is the NBA talent. In recent years, we've seen most teams have had some NBA talent in the Final Four, and to have a team, I would love it. I would love it if a bunch of great college players can get back to the Final Four or get to the Final Four, but they don't have the NBA talent. So that's the one caveat I like to throw in there.
That's a valid point. And then now I'm thinking through some Final Four teams that may have not had an NBA guy.
Florida. That's always one that I think of. Florida in 2014. None of their top guys were NBA guys. To my knowledge, like Patrick Young. I mean, Scotty Wilbekin might have had a cup of tea. I think of Florida.
So. That Syracuse team, they didn't have any pros with
Benajay and Benajay had a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, I think.
Malachi Richardson, I think, was a pick. But
he fizzled.
Went overseas. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's a valid point. That a lot of teams that do have that success have at least one pro, one guy. But I don't know. Miles Colvin,
Yeah, he
You
could
know,
be.
he's the guy
He'd probably
that,
be the guy.
you know what I mean? He's I don't know how many minutes he's gonna get. You know, he's got a lot of guys ahead of him. But you never know. You never know. I think this might be a year where Matt Painter's not afraid to try different things. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things they're not, I would anticipate, and I saw this in the exhibition, where they're not going to play through E quite as much. You know, they're going to be able to do different things, play through Trey and Ren a little bit more, play through their guards a little bit more, and kind of balance that out a little bit so that those guys are used to making plays, you know, in the crunch time when the pressure's on.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I got a few more questions for you before I let you go and be respectful of your time here. But do well, obviously you think Purdue has done enough and to improve from last season. They added, they have it's Colvin, right? Yeah, Miles Colvin. And then they added the defensive guard from
Lance
maybe,
Jones, yep.
well, maybe Southern Illinois, was it? Or I'm not
Yep.
sure where he was from, but yeah. So I think people that might not jump off the page and people be like, wow, that's a lot. But I think that's kind of what they needed. Just a little bit more of that athleticism, a little bit more
Right.
defensive minded. But the last question I'll ask you about Purdue is, take Zach Edey off the team last year. And for people watching, Purdue fans, I enjoyed Purdue. But my question for you is, does last year's Purdue team without Zach Edey, do they make the NCAA tournament?
It's a good question. I don't think I've ever thought about that.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I have so much respect for Edey,
I
because I
think
don't
they're a
know.
bubble team last year without Edey. I think that there would have been a lot on the freshman guards, and it ended up being a lot on them. I think they kind of hit that freshman wall at a certain point, both of them, and that's expected. That's to be expected, unless you're, a top 10 pick in the draft, right? Like you're gonna hit that wall at a certain point, just because physically, the competition level raises. You're going up against older guys. You're going up against grown men. It's just bound to happen. I think without Edey, to answer your question, I think Tre Ren and Caleb First step in a little bit more with that opportunity and contribute. And I think it's tough, man. Like, they got four guys, outside of Edey that probably, if you insert them on, Rutgers or Penn State or Nebraska, are easily starters. But they all have to share those minutes and be we guys and do what's best for the team with Gillis and some of the other guys off their bench. So I think without Edey, to answer your question, I think if you put those guys in and give them that opportunity, I think that they still could have some success. But to answer your question, probably a bubble team without Edey.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And that's just, it's not disrespecting Purdue. It's not disrespecting Matt Painter. Oh, Matt Painter is phenomenal. Matt Painter is one of the best coaches in the country. But yeah, I just that's a credit to Zach Edey. I think he made life as like easy as it possibly could be on two freshman guards with that kind of playing time. Like he really lifted up his teammates and made Purdue phenomenal. So what do you make of the Big Ten struggles in the NCAA tournament? And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what do you make of the struggles? What do you think the reason is? And do you think there's any traction in the theory where say the Big Ten is too physical, where like the Big Ten, they break each other down. They're used to that physical brand of play. They get away with a lot. And then the tournament comes around, you get a West Coast whistle, and all of a sudden things change a little bit. And you're kind of fatigued by that point in time. Do you think there's any validity to that theory?
Not so much, if I'm being honest, just because this has been a hotter topic in the last 2-3 years. Because prior to that, I mean, Michigan and Michigan State, with those teams with, Wagner and Poole, those teams made the Final Four. And then Valentine made a Final Four. The Wisconsin teams have been in the Final Four. And so I think it's just, for me, the biggest thing that I've seen in recent years, the teams that really go far, their fourth or fifth options have big games. You know what I mean? Like when I watch, certain tournament teams have those runs, it's, I'm actually preparing for, I got Rutgers and Princeton. Like a guy like, and you might not even know this name, a guy like Blake Peters, right? He's the fourth option for Princeton. And, he averages like 13 points per game in the NCAA tournament, has a big 17-point outburst, and shoots 60% from three. You know what I mean? So I think you kind of need some luck in that regard, because in that type of setting in the NCAA tournament, a lot of times they're going to take away, just because the intensity level, like your star players aren't going to have star level games a lot of times. Like, and that's not to say they're going to play bad, but they're not going to have, the Keegan Murrays of the world, or the Trace Jackson Davises of the world, the Hunter Dickinsons of the world. They're not going to have, 10 of 14 nights with 25 points and 9 rebounds. That's just not the reality of the NCAA tournament. It's going to be, they might get close to those numbers, but it's going to be in a lot higher volume, right? And so that's where I think when you have a guy that could come in, maybe off your bench, or just a guy that doesn't get, that's not highly respected, so to speak, on the scouting report. When you have a guy like that come in and give you a big game or have a big set of games, that can really propel you. So I think that's what the reason why I think the Big Ten is going to have success this year, because there's a lot of depth in the league. There's guys that can do that are capable of doing that, whether it be from the transfer portal or even some freshmen on given teams in the conference. So I think that, for me, more than the physicality, because the league has always been physical. It was physical when I played. Yeah. It was more physical than the Pac-12 or the ACC or the SEC, and all those conferences had their strong suits as well, whether it be athleticism, skill, or whatever. But I don't think that's the reason for me. I think it's more, can guys who are not expected to step up had those big games? It might not even be scoring either. It could be, rebounding, or it could be stopping another team's best player. So I love the depth in the conference. I think a lot of teams can go 9-10 deep. And so I think that's why I think they'll have tournament success this year.
Yeah, agreed. And I had Raphael Davis on the show, and he made a really good point where he said, I think the top echelon of the Big, or at least a point that I agree with. He said the top echelon of the Big Ten he thinks is going to be better than it was last year, but he thinks he could see the bottom being a little weaker. And I think that the upper echelon especially is looking tough to me. I really think that the top two is tough. I think Illinois obviously has the talent to be tough. And Maryland, I'm not as high in Maryland as others. I think Wisconsin adding AJ Storr, I think they could be a team. And it's classic Wisconsin where the expectations aren't super high. That's when they're at their best. So I think the top teams in the Big Ten are better than they were last year. So I think I think this could be a year where they break through and make the Final Four. So Zach Edey, obviously he was a player of the year, national player of the year. Do you think there's anyone in the Big Ten who can give him a run for his money? And if not, who do you think the runner-up would be?
I think Terrence Shannon Jr. could give him a run for his money this year. I really do. I think that this could be a year where Terrence Shannon Jr. is one of the leading scorers in the nation. And if you're one of the leading scorers in the nation at a Power 5 conference, that usually means that you're going to be player of the year, right? Yeah. And especially if they have the success as a team. You know what I mean? Like, I think if he can lead them to a top 2 or top 3 seed, be, at 23 points per game, something like that. And then let's say that Zach Edey doesn't get quite the minutes that he got last year, just because Matt Painter wants to mix things up, save him, make sure that he's fresh for the NCAA tournament. I think there could be a world where Terrence Shannon Jr. is now challenging or in the hunt with Zach Edey for being Big Ten Player of the Year. But I still think that, those are all hypotheticals. I still think that Edey's going to be Player of the Year.
Okay. And give me your preseason first team All Big Ten.
I'm gonna go Edey, Shannon Jr. I'm gonna go Jameer Young. I'm gonna go Boo Buie, and man, that fifth spot, man. Oof. I will go. A lot of people have Tyson Walker. I do not think Tyson Walker. And I love Tyson Walker. I love Tyson Walker. I don't think he's going to be first team. To me, that fifth spot is wide open because the two guards, Young and Bowie, are going to have the ball in their hands.
Yeah.
Right. Because I feel like those guys are primed to, have first team seasons. Kamwa can get it. I think he's going to have a lot of opportunity at Michigan. That was the name. And this is where I'm going to go. I'm going to go Cliff Amore. Cliff Amore will be first team All Big Ten this season.
There we go. All right.
Cliff Amore. That was the name that popped into my head, and it slipped my mind. Cliff Amore, that's my fifth pick. Cliff Amore will be first team All League. I think he's going to have a monster year. I think he's going to be a guy that's around 17 and 11. I think he was at 14 and 9 last year. I think he's going to increase those numbers. And I think if you go 17 and 11 in the Big Ten, and as long as you finish within the top 10, which I think Rutgers will slip in there, maybe at like an 8 spot. I'm gonna go Cliff Amore.
All right, good deal. And I want to plug one thing in that just entered my mind from earlier. I said I'm not high on Maryland. For me, I'll give you my top 4. Obviously, Purdue, Michigan State are my top 1 and 2. 3, 4, either order. I actually like your alma mater. I like Northwestern over. I like Northwestern, Wisconsin, and I'll go Illinois to round out my top 5. But I think for me, they're either. I don't know. I could see them being. Like I said, I could see them being really good. I could also see them fizzling. So I wanted to throw that in there. Actually, your alma mater is a team that I'm bullish on compared to Maryland. And that's all I got for you. I got a rapid fire round real quickly where I'll just give you a bunch of questions and just answer in a timely fashion.
Gotcha.
All right. So, all right. Who has the best home court advantage in the Big Ten?
Indiana.
Toughest individual matchup you've ever played?
Roy Devin Marble.
What was the toughest loss you experienced in college?
Oh, gosh. That's not going to be a quick. I think my senior year when we lost to Missing, because I was like when we knew that we weren't going to probably be in the tournament.
Sure. Best teammate you've ever had?
I'll say Sanjay Lumpkin and Bryant McIntosh.
Favorite individual team you've covered as an analyst?
Last year's Northwestern team.
All right. Favorite player, favorite individual player that you've covered as an analyst?
Boo Buie.
Favorite player growing up?
Allen Iverson.
Dogs or cats?
Ty. I don't really like animals.
Okay. Favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Favorite food?
Gumbo.
Favorite movie?
Four Brothers with Mark Wahlberg.
All right, and a few more here. Favorite city you've ever visited?
Thessalonica, Greece.
All right. Biggest pet peeve?
They always come to me like when it happens. Yeah, I would say people who don't communicate well. Like just people who don't communicate in advance.
All right. And the last one, favorite musical artist?
Lecrae.
Good deal. All right, Tre, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Best of luck this year, and I'm looking forward to staying connected along the way.
Likewise, man. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, bro.